The former commander-in-chief of the armed forces of Ukraine and now the ambassador of Ukraine to Great Britain, Valery Zaluzhny, believes that the Third World War has already begun and is taking place specifically on the territory of Ukraine. As evidence that this is indeed the Third World War, the general cites the involvement in the Russian-Ukrainian conflict of countries such as North Korea, Iran, and the People's Republic of China. He reminds that North Korean troops are already fighting alongside the Ukrainian army. Iran is supplying Russia with its drones to combat Ukraine, and components of Chinese production can be found in Russian weaponry. Overall, the assessment of the armed forces of Ukraine regarding the very fact of the beginning of the Third World War reflects the nature of this Third World War and how it may differ from the First and Second World Wars. It primarily refers to the fact that the First and Second World Wars occurred in a situation where humanity did not yet possess nuclear weapons, not just as a deterrent, but specifically as weapons of mass destruction. Both the First and Second World War, especially the Second, led to the true devastation of Europe, half of the continent. They were literally in ruins. Despite the absence of nuclear weapons, both coalitions did not fear the destruction of residential areas in cities. They did not shy away from the destruction of a large number of people, as happened during the Holocaust, or from the mass relocation of people from one European country to another, as occurred after the relevant decisions of the Yalta Conference. However, there was no talk of the complete destruction of Europe as such, or the total annihilation of humanity, even after the dangers of the consequences of the Second World War were discussed, which, to be honest, for many decades became a real vaccination against large-scale conflicts for Europeans, Americans, and the inhabitants of the former Soviet Union. Now, when the effect of this vaccination has practically ended, at least in countries like the Russian Federation, China, and dictatorial countries, there are fears that the use of nuclear weapons, which may arise as a result of a global war, will lead to the annihilation of humanity as such. The exchange of strategic nuclear strikes practically leaves no chance for the participants of such a conflict to survive. And thus, since the contradictions between the world of democracy and the world of dictatorships do not allow for any effective compromises, and starting a great struggle for spheres of influence is simply frightening, the Third World War is occurring and will obviously continue to occur in the coming decades, albeit in the form of local conflicts. One of these local conflicts is the war of Russia against Ukraine. We can see that despite the involvement in this war of Russia's allies from the authoritarian camp, primarily the People's Republic of China, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, and the Islamic Republic of Iran, Eastern countries are doing and will do everything possible to ensure that this war does not cross the borders of Ukrainian statehood. In the early years of the war, there were even attempts to restrain Ukraine from allowing this conflict to spill over into the territory of the Russian Federation itself as the aggressor state, and only now are Western governments agreeing that the war needs to be taken to the territory of Russia. However, as we can see from the Russian perspective, this leads not to conclusions about the necessity of ending the war, but to conclusions about the need to escalate the stakes in this war. Because Russia indeed views this war as an element of the Third World War and believes that victory in one of the conflicts on one of the theaters of operations can significantly change the balance of power in the world, at least transforming the Russian Federation into a political and military hegemon of the European continent, which is part of Vladimir Putin's ambitious political plans and possibly part of China's geopolitical strategy. As we can see, the Russian-Ukrainian war is not the only major conflict in the modern world. there is another major conflict in the Middle East. And we can see, at least against the backdrop of the International Criminal Court issuing arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant, supporters of one side in the Russian-Ukrainian war become opponents of the other side that has faced aggression when it comes to the raid by the terrorist organization Hamas against Israel. And it is precisely such contradictions, when there are no clear coalitions and sympathies in one case, where some US allies do not align with sympathies towards others, that are also an important component. These processes occurring in the modern world, processes that do not allow for the establishment of a stable coalition that would help defeat the evil that confidently believes in its ability to impose new rules of the game on the civilized world and significantly reduce the influence of the US as the main democratic state in the world in the coming years and decades. So, besides the Russian-Ukrainian war, many other conflicts will obviously arise. General Valery Zaluzhny says that the West has a chance to stop the Third World War precisely on the Russian-Ukrainian track. However, in my opinion, the West is unlikely to be ready to agree with such a perspective, if only because it requires not just significant escalation of the situation, but also poses a risk that could lead to the use of nuclear weapons. Moreover, it is not so much a nuclear state against a non-nuclear one, which would not yet be a catastrophe for the West, but rather a nuclear state against nuclear states, which in turn would lead to an exchange of nuclear strikes and truly start the Third World War in the classic sense of the First and Second, only with the possibility of destroying humanity as such. The attempt to contain the conflict within its local framework in the coming years will be the main task of the foreign policy of Western countries. However, will it be possible to maintain the dominance of the democratic world within the framework of this task? Will this democratic world have to negotiate with Beijing and Moscow about the distribution of spheres of influence just to ensure its own security and sacrifice the interests of certain countries for the sake of that security? This is an open question for the coming decades of the 21st century, and of course, the Russian-Ukrainian war outcome will be one of the answers to this complex question. Thank you, friends. Stay on this channel, subscribe to it, follow my social media and the channels on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee, which help develop these resources. Use the sponsorship feature on YouTube itself. Victory and peace. Good luck to you.